All right, so here's my quick review of Americade this year, and this is 2018. I went to Americade a long time ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, I guess. It was a while ago. I ended up driving up there instead of riding my bike because it was late when I left. It was dark when I left, and there was supposed to be a hurricane when I left, so I ended up driving, which was one of the wisest decisions I ever made. So this time, I don't have a bike, which made that easy, and I didn't really have opportunities to go before for the last 5 or 6 years for various reasons. But this time I decided I'm definitely going. I got a chance, I got time, I got money, so we're going. And I went up, and basically there was no hurricane. The weather was really nice. I could have ridden. I went during the day. The roads were pretty good and everything, and I probably could have ridden up. It would have taken me a couple of days, maybe stopped in the middle. But all along the way up there, and it was like so many times when I go for a long ride, I'm like, you still would be crazy to take a chance to ride like this, ride 500 miles on a motorcycle instead of driving a car. And so sure enough, I get up there, and I get up there Sunday, the night before Monday when it officially starts. And there was almost nobody there, and hotels were pretty cheap that night. So I ended up getting a hotel that night, staying, and getting up in the morning and going and eagerly racing over to get registered, for the demos on Tuesday. And basically found out that people would be there 6 o'clock in the morning for the demos. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to be here at 6 o'clock in the morning. I'm not even thinking about it. Just went back and got my car, went driving around, the lake, drove all the way up 9L to past Bolton or whatever the next town is, and then found a halfway decent looking golf course from the road, and didn't play there because it was $120 for the course for a round. Went on driving around, found some cool roads, drove on those in my car. Again, was happy that I was in my car because the roads had a lot of gravel and potholes and stuff like that on them, and I was happy not to be racing up and down those hills in my on my bike with all the gravel and potholes and stuff, instead of in my car with 4 wheels, and kind of enjoyed that. Came back, got a nice dinner, went to bed early, thinking I was going to get up kind of early to go down and join the line for registration. I got there at 7:30 at the Honda. I figured I'd start, my car was parked in the back near the Aprilia demo, which was pretty cool that Aprilia was there. Never actually ridden an Aprilia. I was glad that they were there. So I got there, checked in. Aprilia wasn't starting their sign-ons or sign-ups until 8:30. There was almost nobody there, 8 o'clock. So I said, okay, let me go over to Honda and see what happens, because that was like the other one I really hadn't ridden. I never really ridden a Honda demo officially, so I wanted to do that. Going over there, and it was a zoo. I mean, there were hundreds of people there at the Honda demo. And they said, oh, you're here before 8 o'clock. Take a number. And they pulled off like one of those long rolls of tape where you take a number and it has, up 1 to 1,000 on it, right? Just like you go to a bakery and pull a number there. Probably this was the start of a lot of hilarity, because the woman, I showed her my number, and I said, is this 996 or 9? What was it upside down? It's 996 right if you look at it one way, and in the other way, it's 966. Okay, so I wasn't sure, and I asked her, I said, is this 996 or is 966? And she said, well, she looked at it, and with the white number up front and the tab at the bottom, it's supposed to be how it's read, and that way it read 966. She looked at it upside down and said it read 996. I was like, okay, fine. So I came and I asked her, what time or what number are you on now? When they started at 982. Let's put it that way. 982. At 8:30 they started taking $9.82 for the sign up at the registration desk. Okay, I came back and went over to the Aprilia desk, signed in there, registered for a ride. Came back in 45 minutes. I mean, it was like 8:30 or 8:45 or 9 o'clock or something like that. I signed up for an 11 o'clock ride. Came back to the Honda dealer to demo. They were only on the 45th number pass where they started. They were trying to register 5 people at a time on their little Wi-Fi networks, and it was taking forever because the network was very slow. Plus, everybody else there was using the same Wi-Fi or internet connection, and everybody. I mean, there was Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, Indian, Slingshot, and somebody else. I forgot who was there. And everybody was trying to, BMW was there, and they were all trying to use the same connection, and it was just a nightmare. It was taking forever to register, so of course, only the people who were at the demo booth with the least traffic actually got registered and had time to sit around or whatever and take the ride, which, of course, the least one there was Indian. Almost nobody was signing up for Indians, but the next one was Aprilia, and then KTM. But KTM had only brought out their nakeds and their DP bikes. So pretty much all the bikes, not only they didn't have the RC8 there or whatever. They had the Super Duke 1290, and then they had the Duke 690 or 7100 or whatever, and the 390 and so forth. But I wasn't really interested in riding any of the KTMs because I'd ridden the 390. I really had no interest in riding the 7 or 800 because it was so expensive for a single. And I was like, forget it. I'm not paying $9,000 for a 750 single. And the other bikes were off-road bikes. I really had no interest whatsoever in buying them and riding them anyway. ADV bikes, whatever. Even, the 1290 was not really of interest to me. I wasn't interested in a $16,000 1300cc V-twin. Just had no interest in it, or V4, whatever it is. Which is, of course, cheaper than the Ducati 1200R, but still, I mean, it was, it's just not, and it's certainly not as attractive as the 1200R. And I had no real interest in it. I'm just not interested in anything like that KTM product range. Okay, just not. It's just too expensive and too flaky looking for what you get. So anyway, I went up to look around and watching the guys wreck on the low speed, test track in the middle, and one guy get carted off in an ambulance and have to go to the hospital, and another guy fall down and have to be rolled off his, a bike pulled off him and he rolled away and fell twice. They finally convinced him to stop trying the thing and everything. And I just passed the Yamaha line because I'd already kind of pretty much ridden all the Yamahas I was interested in riding, or I said, well, at least maybe I'll ride them later. But I hadn't ridden was any of the Hondas, so that was my primary focus, or the new Gixxer. So I went over to Suzuki to get a ride on the new GSX-R 1000, and someone had wrecked one of their GSX-R 1000s on the demo. At that morning, someone had put one off in the weeds. So the guy's really anxious, and I was like, okay, fine, I'll sign up for that. So hopefully I'll be able to ride it, today, and just go ahead and get that out of my get the experience. I mean, how can you pass riding a GSX-R 1000 if you get a chance to ride it? You've never ridden it before, especially the new one. So then I went back to Honda, came there, and they had made it up to, 65. I mean, it was ridiculous. They were just completely packed with guys wanting to ride these Goldwings. They only had 2 or 3 bikes there that even were of interest to me, and they were either the 650s, the CBR 650F, which somehow is a 654, or the CB 650 naked, has the same engine, same exhaust, same everything, but it's a naked, or the CBR 1000, or is 1100, which is like a throwback version of the CBR, like the original CBR, which again, not really of interest to me. They really didn't have, I was hoping they would have like, a CBR 1000, but they didn't. And, the CBR 650 looks like the CBR 1000 or the CB 600 RR or whatever. It looks like it, but it's not. It's a different bike, different tune, different seating position, different engine, but it's similar in looks. It's very similar to what Kawasaki is doing with the Ninja 300, 400, 650, and the 600 and whatever, okay? But it's not the same as the Firebird. So I didn't bother taking it too seriously. I didn't bother worrying about the fact that even at 10 o'clock, after I'd actually 12 o'clock, after I'd finished the Aprilia demo, even then they still had not finished calling those numbers to register to get up to where I was. I came back there after I took the Suzuki demo, and then they had finished. But then the only thing they had open were baggers to ride for the rest of the day. BMW had actually gone through all their early registration, and I could have ridden a BMW, and I could have probably ridden a Yamaha also, of interest. But the problem is my schedule at that time was to go on the Tuono ride that I took at 11 o'clock. So I went back and signed out of my hotel room, came back and came and took the Tuono ride. And then from 11 to 1 o'clock, I was going to do a couple other errands, which I ended up not doing. But I did take pictures along the way. But I ended up not doing them for like mailing stuff because the post office was closed between 12 and 1 o'clock. So that was one problem down. I got something and came back. And then at 1 o'clock, we were getting ready to have a meeting for the Suzuki demo. Despite the fact that somewhere between 11 and 1 o'clock, someone had bailed another Gixxer 1000, okay, and put it in the weeds. So the guy was all kinds of anxious. The cops are there taking reports, all this kind of stuff. I look back in the back, and sure enough, there it is: broken fairing, broken turn signals, grass in the fairing and everything. And but they had another one. They had a white one sitting out there on the line. So I said, okay, my GSX-R 1000 ride is secure. Sure enough, it starts to rain at 11 o'clock, and it rains for about 5 minutes. First light, then a little harder, and then a little harder, then lighter, and then it stops raining. And the whole time it's raining, I'm sitting there going, they'll never go on that demo now. They'll never take us out now. It's raining, blah, blah, blah. But they just had 2 accidents. And sure enough, it stops raining. Guy walks over and says, okay, everyone saddle up. Come over for the demo meeting. And I'm like going, oh, shit. Now I have to ride this bike. And in the rain. And after 2 accidents. And I was just like, man, I don't really know if I want to do this. So I put on my helmet, put on my gloves, walk over to the white GSX-R 1000, and there's some dude sitting on it already because it was the third of the third bike of 3 bikes. 2 of them had already been wrecked, and they didn't take it off the checklist after that. They didn't say, oh, look, we only have 1 bike, so you can't ride, you 2 guys can't ride the same bike, so what you're going to have to do. So I was like, oh, fuck, I don't know if I really even want to go now. At this point, I was already thinking about going to my 215 golf time. And I said, all right, fine, I'll go. What the hell? And I took the GSX-S 750 out for a ride. That was sitting right in front of it, and caught the tail end of the line that it had already gone off down the street on the demo. But let me just say, it was this weird thing because I wouldn't have taken it otherwise. I wasn't impressed with it the first time I rode it, but this time I rode it, and the bike seemed to be well broken in this time, much like this S1000R that I rode the second time in Hatfield. And let me say this, I was much more impressed with the GSX-S 750 than I was with the Tuono, to be honest. I won't say that it looked as good. Certainly the Tuono looked better, but I thought the Tuono handled a lot like an old Yamaha 1200 of familiarity. Okay, it wasn't very light handling at all. It was a short bike, and It had a little bit of buzz, even with the V4 engine, it wasn't quite smooth, It still had a little bit of buzz, and it kind of ran rough, like any old V-twin, ran rough down below about 3,500 RPM, so you had to kind of run it a little bit hot, coast it a little bit, or you would go chugga, 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 if you didn't, until it started to move. And I had it in race mode, so as far as I could, it was either race track or sport. And the little bit of time I had to play around with it before we went on a ride, I chose race mode because it had what I thought was the smoothest throttle response off idle, the most consistent and taunt, yet, it wasn't overbearingly taunt, so I didn't fear for any throttle surge. But it really didn't run that well. I mean, it had good power. I mean, it was decent power, but I wouldn't have said it was anything more than, a 900 maybe. I didn't really feel like it had that much of a motor. And what would happen was it would rev through, in the lower gears, it would rev right through the power band until it got to about, 9,000 RPM, and then it would go, and it would drop off. And the bike had 4,500 miles or 85, I think it had 4,500 miles on it, plenty of miles on it, so it wasn't like it wasn't broken in. It just didn't seem like it ran all that well. It certainly didn't handle all that great. It was certainly front wheel limited and stuff, and there was a few moments where I felt the head shaking and stuff, and this is the RR with the stock Sachs suspension up front. Clutch was okay, brakes were nice, front brakes were nice, a little on the powerful side, certainly 2 fingers brakes, you had to be careful putting them on. But I didn't think it really had that great a power band. I thought it was somewhere between the S1000R and the MT9 in terms of its throttle response, in terms of its power delivery. I'm sure it would be a great bike riding it in 4th or 5th gear at 120 miles an hour. But that's not the bike that I intend to buy, and that's not the way I intend to ride a bike. So the basic thing is that I felt like I was riding in the middle of the pack on the demo. The guys in front of me, the demo leader, and the 4 guys in RSV4s right, tucked up next to him like they were a track day or something. They all went flying off down the road. We went on these twisty back roads and all this kind of stuff. It wasn't wet at all. This is well before it rained, and it was just, they were gone in like the space of a mile at the most, and I was blasting after them on the straights and cruising around the turns. It took me about 10 miles to get used to riding that bike in the corners, and I noticed that in the corners I would pick up maybe 2 or 3 miles per hour when I was comfortable riding it versus when I started and I was being very cautious. Yet I look behind me, and there's all these guys behind me on Motor Guzzi's and all this kind of stuff, and they were not worried about passing me. They weren't worried about trying to stay up with me. I was the slowest of the fast bikes, but faster than the slow bikes. So I was right in the middle. Absolutely, a few times, the demo leader stopped the bikes at a stop sign and waited, got off his bikes, looked back, and waited for us to come up and catch them. And I mean, there were quite a few, bikes there, 6 or 7 bikes, all stopped there with him, and the other half of the demo pack was back behind, cruising up and catching up, on their own pace. And these roads were good twisty roads. They were absolutely great twisty roads. On this demo ride, but the paradox was it wasn't anything really fast. It was 30, 40 mile an hour turns, marked turns, and short straights, some straights and stuff. It wasn't anything that I would have ridden as fast as those guys were riding. And it wasn't anything that I needed a bike with 150 horsepower to ride on it. But it was okay. I just was riding a little bit faster than I really felt comfortable with, but not, I wasn't riding fast enough to get into an accident. But the main thing was, it wasn't like I would buy a $16,000 bike to ride those roads. That wasn't the issue. Now the Suzuki, when we did the demo ride for the Suzuki, on that one we went on to 87, and we went tearing down 87. And yeah, there were a couple of times where I felt it was a little bit light in the loafers, but generally it had enough power, generally handled well, and generally was okay. Both bikes had bars, I think, that were a tad bit too high. The Suzuki even more so than the Aprilia. But the Suzuki was noticeably lighter and noticeably smoother, in terms of its power delivery, in terms of its handling, than the Aprilia was. And overall, I had to admit, I thought the Suzuki was a much more sensible purchase, especially considering it's probably selling for about $7,000, $8,000, whereas the Aprilia, the Tuono RR, is almost certainly selling for about $13,000, $14,000. Okay, I had to say, if I had to choose between those two bikes based on that demo ride, those two demo rides, I almost certainly would have chosen the Suzuki, and I would have said, oh, if I buy the Tuono, it's because maybe I'll need the extra power and maybe I won't mind the extra resistance in turning and the extra girth and weight and mass of the bike. And there's no real reason why those two bikes should weigh significantly different. Okay, seriously, one's an inline 4 750, the other one is a V4 1000. Why should they be significantly different in terms of handling? Only because the tires are so much bigger on the Tuono, and that's it. It just didn't make sense that they handled so differently. They really did. So I think for a general all-around bike, one person riding it, the Suzuki would be a better, more sensible bike. It may, at some level, have been lacking power to some degree at higher speeds, 80 miles an hour, but it wasn't uncomfortable to ride at 75, 80 miles an hour on the highway. And on the back roads, it was perfectly fine in terms of power. Had all the power that I could really need. Okay, maybe not enjoy, but need. I mean, it certainly could have been faster, but I would have taken the S1000R over the Tuono after these demo rides. There's no question about it. I think that the S1000R had the lighter handling, had more than enough power. It was just a wonderful engine on the broken in bike. Brakes decent, not too strong, not too weak, and it was just a blast to ride. Okay. However, it did have that laggy throttle that BMW seemed to have, where the Tuono didn't have it. But I thought the Tuono, on the other hand, just had a rough response, and it just wasn't as much fun. It wasn't as enjoyable. It may have been if you were parking it up in the mid-range, like in third or fourth gear, and you rode it at 5,000 or 6,000 RPM and just rode the torque, all the time. It might have been so much better, but I really was not impressed with that ride. Perhaps I was riding it in too low a gear, but I don't really think so, and I really think that it just was a little bit too much bike for the roads I was riding it on. That was the major problem. Whereas I'd never, ever had that feeling with the BMW. Never. And from what we did, the S1000R won that competition almost easily. Okay? Now, sure, if we had ridden them all on the highway for 20, 30, 50 miles, I might have a different impression. But that's not what happened. And frankly, again, I say this again, I am not as likely to ride a bike on the highway for 100 miles as I am to drive my car for 100 miles on the highway. So it's pretty simple. So anyway, brought the Suzuki back in, parked it in, thanked everybody, went over to check the Honda. The Honda lady was starting to get a little short-tempered, let's put it that way, not really eager to answer a few questions. Left them, walked back, got in my car, and drove out to play golf.